Hello students, in our previous class we had begun the new lesson called as Two Deer by Leo Tolstoy. By Leo Tolstoy. We are discussing about this lesson Leo Tolstoy ಬಗ್ಗೆ the lesson called as Two Deer. I told you that 2 deer means it is too expensive. So, what was expensive ಅಂತ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಇದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ನಾವು ಚರ್ಚೆ ಮಾಡತ್ತಿದ್ವಿ. We had discussed about this lesson about a small place called as Monaco. Monaco ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಚರ್ಚೆ ಮಾಡತ್ತಿದ್ವಿ. We had discussed about the place where it is located, on which shore it is, and who are the neighboring countries of this place called as Monaco. And about the people over there were hardly about 7,000 population in Monaco. 7,000 population. There were 7,000 in number, and there was a king. There was a king. He had a palace. He has courtiers, he has ministers, he has bishop and general as well as an army. The army consisted of just 60 men. 60 men army, 60 ಜನರದು ಸೈನ್ಯ. That everything was there, but in small in number. Hence it was called as a toy kingdom. ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಏನಂತಿದ್ರು toy kingdom ಅಂತ ಕರೀತಿದ್ರು. Why? Everything was there. But in smaller quantity. The size was small, hardly 7,000 people and 60 men in army. The area was also hardly about 7,000 acres of land. So, it was called as the toy kingdom, and the king who ruled over there, alli yaru raja nadistidalla, he was called as the kinglet. He was called as the kinglet. Kinglet means a small king. Here, he used to govern it. He had taxes also. He had taxes like tobacco, spirit, wine and poll tax. These were the tax levied by the king, but this much of tax wasn't sufficient for him to run his country. ಅವಂದು ಏನೈತಲ್ಲ ಇಷ್ಟ ಇದ್ರ ಮ್ಯಾಗ ಆದಾಯ ಮ್ಯಾಗ ಅವನು ತೆರಿಗೆ ಮ್ಯಾಗ ಅವನು he wasn't able to run his country. So, what did he do? He founded a new special tax source of revenue. Revenue. What was it? From the gaming house. It was from the gaming house. Gaming house in the used to collect the tax. It was a special source of revenue. Here in gaming house they used to play roulette. Roulette is like just ನೀವೇನಂತೀರಿ ಜುಜಾಟ ಅಂತಾರಲ್ಲ ಆ ರೀತಿ, ವೇರ್ ದೇ ಯೂಸ್ ಟು bet on the game. So, it was a betting game and people used to play this game. Very often they used to lose or might at times win, but often they had to give a huge sum of amount to the owner of the gaming house, and from that huge sum most of the amount used to go to the prince. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ರಾಜಾಗ ಸಾಕಷ್ಟು ಹಣ ಇಲ್ಲಿಂದ ಹೋಗ್ತಿತ್ತು. So, when they were unable to run their kingdom on these taxes, most of the tax amount came from this revenue, and he led a very rich lifestyle. The king led a very rich lifestyle. Many of the sovereign German sovereigns, they had banned this game. Idu game ban ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು. ಬ್ಯಾನ್ ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕೆ ಕಾರಣ ಏನಪ್ಪ ಅಂತಂತಂದ್ರೆ because that did much more harm to the people. They used to lose their money, they used to lose somebody else's money, and in despair they used to kill themselves. ಅವ್ರ ಜೀವ ಬಿಡ್ತಿದ್ರು or drown in the river or might shoot themselves. So, idu bad ಆಗಬಾರ್ದು ಅಂತಂತಂದು many of the other countries had banned this game. Now, in Monaco, this was the only place where gaming house was run. ಇದು ಇಲ್ಲೆಷ್ಟ ಮೊನಾಕೋದಾಗ ಅಷ್ಟೇ ಗೇಮಿಂಗ್ ಹೌಸ್ ಅಷ್ಟೇ ನಡೀತಿತ್ತು. ಎವ್ರಿಬಡಿ ಹೂ ವಾಂಟ್ಸ್ ಟು ಪ್ಲೇ ಯೂಸ್ ಟು ಕಮ್ ಟು ಮೊನಾಕೋಗೆ ಬರ್ತಿದ್ರು ಆಟ ಆಡ್ಬೇಕಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಇಚ್ಛೆ ಆಯ್ತು ಅಂದರೆ ದೇ ಯೂಸ್ ಟು ಕಮ್ ಓವರ್ ದೇರ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ದೇ ಯೂಸ್ ಟು ಬೆಟ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ದ king used to rule that place. And here is a quotation you can refer to. We can't earn stone palaces by honest labor ಅಂತ ಅಂದ್ರೇನು, ನೀವು ಪ್ರಾಮಾಣಿಕವಾಗಿ ದುಡಿದರೆ ನೀವು ಅರಮನೆ ಕಟ್ಟಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ. That means the king had to do this illegal type of tax collection also. He knew it was bad, but there was no other alternative. Collecting tax from gaming house was the bad thing. Obviously, he also knew that collecting tax from tobacco, spirit or wine was also not good business, but yet he has to live like a king. So, there was no other way for him to do. Now, in this place Monaco, a murder was committed. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಏನಾಗಿತ್ತಪ್ಪ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಮೊನಾಕೋದಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ದಿವಸ ಮರ್ಡರ್ ಆಗಿತ್ತು. ಯೂಶ್ವಲಿ ದ ಪೀಪಲ್ ಫ್ರಾಮ್ ಮೊನಾಕೋದವ್ರು ಹೆಂಗೆ ಅದಾರ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ದೇ ವೇರ್ ಪೀಸ್ ಲಿವಿಂಗ್ ಪೀಪಲ್. ದ ಪೀಪಲ್ ವೇರ್ ಪೀಸ್ ಲಿವಿಂಗ್ ಪೀಪಲ್. ಸೊ ಸಚ್ ಎ ಕ್ರೈಮ್ ಹ್ಯಾಡ್ ನಾಟ್ ಅಕರ್ಡ್ ಅರ್ಲಿಯರ್. ಇಂಥದ್ದು ಘಟನೆ ಎಂದೂ ಆಗಿರಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಟೈಮ್ ಅ ಮರ್ಡರ್ ಹ್ಯಾಡ್ ಟೇಕನ್ ಪ್ಲೇಸ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ದಿ ಜಡ್ಜಸ್, ದಿ jurymen all gathered to give the punishment. What punishment could be given to the criminal? ಏನು punishment ಕೊಡೋಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯತೆ ಇದೆ ಅಂತ they discussed and came out with the solution that the criminal has to be executed. ಏನು ಮಾಡಬೇಕಪ್ಪ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಆ ಕ್ರಿಮಿನಲ್ಗೆ they had to execute, to kill him, to cut off his head. ಅವನು ರುಂಡ ಕಟ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಂತಂದು ಇದು ಯೋಚನೆ ಮಾಡಿದರು. So they had thought of executing his head and they took the matter to the king. ರಾಜನ ಹತ್ರ ಹೋಯಿದ್ರು. The king also agreed that if the person had to be executed, let him be executed. He also gave the permission to execute him. Now, from here on page number 8, second paragraph, then this is where we have to begin the lesson from. There was only one hitch in the matter. To execute a person, ಒಬ್ರಿಗೆ ಯಾರಿಗೋ ಒಬ್ರಿಗೆ ರುಂಡ ಕತ್ತರಿಸ್ಬೇಕಾತಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ಸಣ್ಣ ಸಮಸ್ಯೆ ಇತ್ತು. ದೇರ್ ವಾಸ್ ಅ ಸ್ಮಾಲ್ ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮ್. hitch ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ a small problem. There was a small problem. Only one hitch in the matter, that was that they had neither a guillotine for cutting heads of nor an executioner. ಏನಿತ್ತಪ್ಪ ಸಮಸ್ಯೆ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ they did not have a guillotine. Guillotine is a machine to chop off one's head. Guillotine is a machine to cut off the head. So they did not have that machine, as well as the executioner. Executioner is the one is the person who operates this machine. ಈ machine operate ಮಾಡೋನಿಗೆ he is called as an executioner. So they did not have neither of this. There wasn't any guillotine machine nor an executioner. The ministers considered the matter and decided to address an inquiry to the French government. Now all the ministers gathered. They thought of what could be done, and they thought that they could enquire to the French government, which was their neighboring country. ಇವ್ರದ್ದು ನೇಬರಿಂಗ್ ಪಕ್ಕದಲ್ಲೇನೆ ಐತೆ ಅಂತ ಕೂಡಲೇ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಕೇಳಬೇಕಂತ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು ಟು ದಿ ಫ್ರೆಂಚ್ ಗೌರ್ಮೆಂಟ್. ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ದಿ ಫ್ರೆಂಚ್ ಗೌರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ asking whether the French could not lend them a machine and an expert to cut off the criminal's head. So they made an inquiry to the French government whether they could supply the guillotine machine and an executioner and an expert to cut off the criminal's head, and if so, would the French kindly inform them what it would cost, what would be the price of the guillotine machine as well as the executioner. ಇತರದ್ದು ಎಷ್ಟು ಖರ್ಚಾಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ they wanted to know the price. The letter was sent. A week later the reply came. As formality, they had sent the letter, and within a week's period they got the reply. A machine and an expert could be supplied and the cost would be 16,000 francs. So what did the French government say? That it costed 16,000 francs. It costed the French government quoted that the guillotine machine costed 16,000 francs. Would be 16,000 francs. This was laid before the king. He thought it over. 16,000 francs. The wretch is not worth the money. 16,000 francs ಅಂತ ಕೂಡಲೇ the king thought over it and told that this much money was too much. 16,000 francs was too much on that useless fellow. Why to spend so much of money on the criminal? ಆ ಒಬ್ಬ ವ್ಯಕ್ತಿ ಮ್ಯಾಗ ಕೈದಿ ಮ್ಯಾಗ ಯಾಕೆ 16,000 ಫ್ರ್ಯಾಂಕ್ಸ್ ಖರ್ಚು ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತಂತಂದು ಯೋಚನೆ ಮಾಡ್ದ. The wretch is not worth the money, said he. Can't it be done somehow cheaper? So they were searching for some cheaper and a better way of executing him. ಅವನಿಗೆ ಯಾವುದಾದ್ರೂ ಒಂದು ಬೇರೆ ರೀತಿಯಾಗಿ ಇಷ್ಟಕ್ಕೊಂದು ಖರ್ಚು ಮಾಡಿ ಅವನಿಗೆ ಕೊಂದು ಹಾಕೋದು ಅಥವಾ ಅವನಿಗೆ ಪನಿಷ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಕೊಡೋದು ಸರಿಯಲ್ಲ ಅಂತಂತಂದು he felt. Why 16,000 francs is more than 2 francs a head on the whole population. To collect this 16,000 francs, he has to collect it from the population. That means they had 7,000 population and everyone has to contribute for this amount. ಈ ಅಮೌಂಟ್ ಸಂಬಂಧ ಅವರು ಪ್ರತಿಯೊಬ್ಬರು ಮತ್ತು ಕಾಂಟ್ರಿಬ್ಯೂಟ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು. More than 2 francs a head on the whole population. They have to pay 2 more francs extra as the tax. As the tax, they have to pay 2 more francs extra. The population won't stand it and it may cause a riot. So the population won't accept it. ಅವರು accept ಮಾಡಂಗಿಲ್ಲ. ಈ ಟ್ಯಾಕ್ಸ್ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ರಾ ಕೊಡಬೇಕಂತಂದ್ರೆ they wouldn't be happy and they won't accept it and they might reject it. Or they might go against the king. ರಾಜಂದ ವಿರುದ್ಧ ನಿಂದಿರ್ತಾರೆ, ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಅವರು ಅಲ್ ಅಂತಾರೆ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ರಾಯ್ಟ್ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ದಾಂಧಲಿ ಸಕಟ್ ಆಗ್ಬೋದು. ಸೊ ಟು ಮೇಂಟೈನ್ ಪೀಸ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಆರ್ಡರ್, ಸೊ ಇಟ್ ವುಡ್ ಬಿ ಟೂ ಮಚ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ದೇ ಕುಡಂಟ್ ಟ್ಯಾಕ್ಸ್ ಇಟ್ ಆನ್ ದಿ population. So a council was called to consider what could be done. So again a council was called. ಒಂದು ಸಭೆ ಕರೀತಾರೋ, ಸಭೆ ಕರೆದು they again discuss what could be done again ಅಂತಂದು they thought of it, and it was decided to send a similar enquiry to the king of Italy. Now they had already inquired to the French government. Now they were thinking about sending a similar enquiry to the Italian government. What did the Italian say? Send a similar enquiry to the king of Italy. The French government is a republican and has no proper respect for a king. French government is a republican and probably they won't care much about the king of Monaco. ಅವ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಅಷ್ಟೇನು ಕಾಳಜಿ ಮಾಡಲಿಕ್ಕಿಲ್ಲ. So it is better to ask the Italian government ಅಂತಂದು they thought. But the king of Italy was a brother monarch. Here there was a brother monarch. So there was a smaller king and might be induced to do the things cheaper, and probably he might offer at the cheapest way possible. He might offer the guillotine machine at the cheapest way. So the letter was written and a prompt reply was received. One letter haskuttidru ಆದ ತಕ್ಷಣ they received a reply. The Italian government wrote that they would have pleasure in supplying both a machine and an expert, and the whole cost would be 12,000 francs including travelling expenses. So the French government quoted that it would be 12,000 francs. That it would be 12,000 francs. ಯಾಕಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಆದ ತಕ್ಷಣ they told that both the guillotine machine as well as the executioner and the travelling expense all together it would be 12,000 francs ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ they quoted. This was obviously cheaper, much more cheaper than the earlier amount. 16,000 francs ಗಿಂತ 12,000 is much more cheaper, but still it seemed too much. Yet it was too much, yet they couldn't afford this much money also. The rascal was really not worth the money. He felt that this much of money on spending the criminals punishment is too much. ಇದು ಸಕಟ್ ಬಹಳ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತಂದು he felt. The rascal was not really worth the money. It would still mean nearly 2 francs more per head. Obviously, again they have to tax almost about 2 francs on the each head. ಪ್ರತಿಯೊಬ್ಬರ ಮ್ಯಾಗ ಮತ್ತು 2 francs ಟ್ಯಾಕ್ಸ್ ಬಂದ ಬರುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತಂದು this was the outcome. 2 francs more per head on the taxes. Another council was called. Again, what could be done? Again, they called a council. ಒಂದು ಸಭೆ ಕರೆದ್ರು. They discussed and considered how it could be done with less expense. So, ಇದಕ್ಕಿಂತ ಮತ್ತು ಯಾವ ರೀತಿದಾಗ ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯತೆ ಐತಿ ಅಂತಂದು they again thought over it. Could not one of the soldiers perhaps be got to do it in a rough and homely fashion? So, again they thought about it, what could be done, and finally they thought that one of their soldiers, obviously they had soldiers, about 60 men, they were soldiers, they had an army. Out of that army, one of the soldiers could perform the task of killing this criminal. Perhaps, but okay. Could not one of the soldiers perhaps be got to do in a rough and homely fashion? In the homely way, they could kill him probably. Antantando they considered this matter. The general was called and asked. So, they called the general and asked him, can't you find us a soldier who would cut the man's head off? So, they inquired to the general. Generalಗೆ ಕರೆದು ಕೇಳ್ತಾರೋ ಸೇನಾಪತಿಗೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಕರೆದು ಕೇಳ್ತಾರೆ ಏನಪ್ಪ ಅಂತಂತಂದು that whether they could find a soldier who could chop off the head of the criminal ಅಂತಂದು they asked the matter to the general. In war they don't mind killing people. ಯುದ್ಧದಾಗ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆಪ್ಪ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ obviously they kill. ಯುದ್ಧನಾಗ ಏನಪ್ಪ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಒಬ್ರಿಗೊಬ್ರು ಯುದ್ಧದಲ್ಲಿ ಇವರಿದ್ದವರು ಈ ಸೈನ್ ಇದ್ದಿದ್ದು ಬೇರೆ ಸೈನಿಗೆ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಕೊಲ್ತಾರೆ ಅಥವಾ ಅವರಿದ್ದವ್ರು ಇವ್ರಿಗೆ ಕೊಲ್ತಾರೆ. ಸೊ ದೇ ಆರ್ ಟ್ರೈನ್ಡ್ ಫಾರ್ ಕಿಲ್ಲಿಂಗ್. ಸೊ ವೈ ಡೋಂಟ್ ದೇ ಡೂ ದಿಸ್ ಬಿಟ್ ಅ ಫೇವರ್ ಫಾರ್ ದಿ ಕಿಂಗ್ಡಮ್ ಅಂತಂತಂದು ಇದು ಒಂದು ಕೇಳ್ತಾರೆ. ಇನ್ ವಾರ್ ದೇ ಡೋಂಟ್ ಮೈಂಡ್ ಕಿಲ್ಲಿಂಗ್ ಪೀಪಲ್. ಇನ್ ಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಟ್ ದಟ್ ಈಸ್ ವಾಟ್ ದೇ ಆರ್ ಟ್ರೈನ್ಡ್ ಫಾರ್. ಇನ್ ಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಟ್ ದ ಟ್ರೈನಿಂಗ್ ಹ್ಯಾಸ್ ಬೀನ್ ಗಿವನ್ ಟು ದಿ ಸೋಲ್ಜರ್ಸ್ ಸೊ ದ್ಯಾಟ್ ದೇ ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಕಿಲ್. ಬೇರೆಯವ್ರಿಗೆ ಕೊಲ್ಲೋ ಸಂಬಂಧನ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಟ್ರೈನಿಂಗ್ ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೋ ಅಂತಂದು ಈ ಸೇ. So, the general talked it over with the soldiers to see whether one of them would not undertake the job. So, the general went and considered the matter to his soldiers. On soldier ಹೋಗಿ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಕೇಳ್ತಾನೋ ಕೇಳಿದ ತಕ್ಷಣ what do they say? But none of the soldiers would do it. None of the soldiers accepted this. No, nobody wanted to do this. No, they said, we don't know how to do it. The soldiers said that they didn't know how to chop off the man's head. ಯಾವ ರೀತಿದಾಗ ಒಂದು ರುಂಡ ಕತ್ತರಿಸ್ಬೇಕಂತ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಅವರಿಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಿರಲಿಲ್ಲ. It is not a thing that we have been taught and nobody has given training to them about this, that how to chop off the man's head. They know the war tactics, they know how to fight, they know how to kill people in the war, but they didn't know how to chop off somebody's head. So, none of the soldiers agreed for this. Now again, what could be done? Earlier, the decision was given to chop off his head, but there wasn't any guillotine machine. There wasn't any guillotine machine. They inquired the French government. The French government demanded 16,000 francs. It wasn't feasible. It wasn't acceptable. So they made a similar inquiry to the Italian government. They demanded 12,000 francs. Yet it was too much. And finally, they thought of punishing him in a local way. Any of the soldiers could perform the task, but none of the soldiers also accepted it. So, finally, what could be done now? Again, ಮಾಡಬೇಕು. What was to be done? Again, the ministers considered and reconsidered. They thought of it again and again. What has to be done? They assembled a commission. ಒಂದು ಕಮಿಷನ್ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಒಂದು ಆಯೋಗ. ಒಂದು ಆಯೋಗ ನಿರ್ಮಾಣ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು. ಎ ಕಮಿಟಿ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಸಮಿತಿ. ಎ ಕಮಿಟಿ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಸಬ್ ಕಮಿಟಿ. ಸೊ ಟು ಫೈಂಡ್ ಔಟ್ ದಿ ಸೊಲ್ಯೂಷನ್ ಫಾರ್ ದಿಸ್ ದೇ ಅಪಾಯಿಂಟೆಡ್ ಆ್ಯನ್ ಕಮಿಷನ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಎ ಕಮಿಟಿ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಸಬ್ ಕಮಿಟೀಸ್. ಸೊ ದೇ ಹ್ಯಾಡ್ ಅಪಾಯಿಂಟೆಡ್ ಆಲ್ ದಿಸ್ ಕಮಿಟೀಸ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಅಟ್ ಲಾಸ್ಟ್ ದೇ ಡಿಸೈಡೆಡ್ ದ್ಯಾಟ್ ದಿ ಬೆಸ್ಟ್ ಥಿಂಗ್ ವುಡ್ ಬಿ ಟು ಆಲ್ಟರ್ ದಿ ಡೆತ್ ಸೆಂಟೆನ್ಸ್ ಟು one of the imprisonment for life. So finally they thought that they couldn't kill him, and what could be done? Instead they could give him a punishment life imprisonment, the punishment of life imprisonment. That means instead of killing him, they would be keeping him into the prison for the rest of his life. Decided that the best thing would be to alter the death sentence to the one of the imprisonment for life. This would enable the prince to show his mercy, and it would come cheaper also. See, obviously, instead of spending so much of money on that criminal, they thought of keeping him into the prison, and obviously the king has right to show mercy also. He has that right, and he would be proud to do that favor also. ಅದು ಒಂದು ಫೇವರ್ ಮಾಡ್ದಂಗೂ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ, ಅವನಿಗೆ ಉಸ್ಕೊಂಡಂಗೂ ಆಗ್ತೈತಿ, ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಪ್ರಾಬಬ್ಲಿ they could keep him into the prison for the rest of the life ಅಂತಂದು they thought. So, this was the punishment, final punishment which they had thought, to keep him into the prison. The prince agreed to this. Yes, the king also said, yes, this is a better plan than instead of chopping off his head, because of the financial problem. Prince agreed to this, and so the matter was arranged. The only hitch now was that there was no suitable prison. Now there was another small problem. They had thought that they could keep the criminal into the prison, but now there was some small problem. What it was? Now was that there was no suitable prison. ಏನಪ್ಪ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ಪ್ರಿಸನ್ ಇರಲಿಲ್ಲ, ಜೈಲೇ ಇರಲಿಲ್ಲ, ಎಲ್ಲಿ ಇಡಬೇಕು ಅವನಿಗೆ. ಪ್ರಿಸನ್ ಫಾರ್ ಎ ಮ್ಯಾನ್ ಸೆಂಟೆನ್ಸ್ಡ್ ಫಾರ್ ಲೈಫ್. ಅಂದರೆ ಜೀವನ ಪೂರ್ತಿ ಆಗೋ ಮಟ್ಟ ಅವನಿಗೆ ಒಂದು ಕೈದಿ ರೂಪದಲ್ಲಿ ಅಥವಾ ಅವನಿಗೊಂದು ರೂಮ್ದಲ್ಲಿ ಜೈಲ್ ಒಳಗೆ ಹಾಕಿ ಇಡಬೇಕಂದ್ರೆ ಅಂಥ ಸ್ಥಳನೇ ಇರಲಿಲ್ಲ. ದೆರ್ ವಾಸಂಟ್ ಎನಿ ಪ್ಲೇಸ್. ದೆರ್ ವಾಸ್ ಅ ಸ್ಮಾಲ್ ಲಾಕಪ್. There was a lockup where people were sometimes kept temporarily, hardly 2 or 3 days. ಒಂದು 2 ದಿವಸ 3 ದಿವಸ ಒಂದು ಲಾಕಪ್ ಇತ್ತು. there was a small lockup where the people were kept for 2 or 3 days. ಒಂದು 2-3 ದಿವಸ ಇಟ್ಟು ಮತ್ತೆ ಬಿಡ್ತಿದ್ರು. But there was no strong prison fit for the permanent use. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಇಂಥದ್ದು ಒಂದು ಪ್ರಿಸನ್ ಇರಲಿಲ್ಲ, ಒಂದು ಜೈಲ್ ಇರಲಿಲ್ಲ, where they can keep the prisoner for his rest of life. ಅವ್ನಿಗೆ ಜೀವನ ತುಂಬ ಕಾಯಮವಾಗಿ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಇಡಬೇಕಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಅಂಥದ್ದು ಯಾವುದು ಕೈದಿಖಾನೆ ಇರಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಪ್ರಿಸನ್ ಫಿಟ್ ಫಾರ್ ದಿ ಪರ್ಮನೆಂಟ್ ಯೂಸ್. ಹವೆವರ್ ದೇ ಮ್ಯಾನೇಜ್ ಟು ಫೈಂಡ್ ಅ ಪ್ಲೇಸ್. ಹೆಂಗೆ ಮಾಡಿ ಒಂದು ಯಾವುದಾದ್ರು ಒಂದು ಸ್ಥಳ ಹುಡುಕಿ ತೆಗೆದ್ರು. That would do, and they put the young fellow there and placed a guard over them. What did they do? They found out a place and they put that prisoner into that place, and they also placed a guard over him. Guard ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಕಾವಲ್ಗಾರ, ಅವನಿಗೆ ಕಾಯೋ ಸಂಬಂಧ ಒಬ್ಬ ವ್ಯಕ್ತಿನೂ ಇಟ್ಟರು. The guard had to watch the criminal. The duties of the guard, ಅವನದೇನು ಕೆಲಸಪ್ಪ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ he had to watch the criminal and had also to fetch his food from the palace kitchen. Apart from that, he had to fetch his food. ಅವನು ಊಟ ಸಕಟ ತೊಗೊಂಡು ಬರಬೇಕು. ಎಲ್ಲಿಂದು? ಫ್ರಮ್ ದಿ ಪ್ಯಾಲೇಸ್ ಕಿಚನ್. ಅವನು ಊಟದ ಅರಮನೆಯಿಂದ, ಕಿಚನ್ದಿಂದ, ಅಡುಗೆ ಮನೆಯಿಂದ ಅವನಿಗೆ ಊಟನೂ ತಂದು ಕೊಡಬೇಕು. ದಿಸ್ ವಾಸ್ ಹಿಸ್ ಡ್ಯೂಟಿ. ದ ಪ್ರಿಸ್ನರ್ ರಿಮೈನ್ಡ್ ದೇರ್ ಮಂತ್ ಆಫ್ಟರ್ ಮಂತ್. 1 ತಿಂಗಳಲ್ಲ, 2 ತಿಂಗಳಲ್ಲ, ಅಲ್ಲೇ ಆ ಕೈದಿ ಇದ್ದಿದ್ದ. ಮಂತ್ ಆಫ್ಟರ್ ಮಂತ್ ಟಿಲ್ ಅ ಇಯರ್ ಹ್ಯಾಡ್ ಪಾಸ್ಡ್. ಒಂದು ವರ್ಷ ಆಯಿತು. ಆದ ನಂತರ ಬಟ್ ವೆನ್ ಎ ಇಯರ್ ಹ್ಯಾಡ್ ಪಾಸ್ಟ್, ಒಂದು ವರ್ಷ ಆದ ತಕ್ಷಣ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ, ದ ಕಿಂಗ್ಲೆಟ್ ಲುಕ್ಕಿಂಗ್ ಓವರ್ ದಿ ಅಕೌಂಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಹಿಸ್ ಇನ್ಕಮ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪೆಂಡಿಚರ್. ಇನ್ಕಮ್ ಎಷ್ಟು ಬಂತು, ಖರ್ಚು ಎಷ್ಟಾಯಿತು, ಮತ್ತು ಆದಾಯ ಎಷ್ಟು ಬಂತು, ಇದು ನೋಡುವಾಗ ಅಕೌಂಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಇನ್ಕಮ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪೆಂಡಿಚರ್. ಒನ್ ಡೇ ನೋಟಿಸ್ಡ್ ಅ ನ್ಯೂ ಐಟಮ್ ಆಫ್ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪೆಂಡಿಚರ್. ಹಿ ನೋಟಿಸ್ಡ್ ಅ ನ್ಯೂ ಐಟಮ್ ಆಫ್ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪೆಂಡಿಚರ್. ಆ್ಯಸ್ ಯೂಶ್ವಲ್ ವರ್ಷ ಹೆಂಗೆ ಚೆಕ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಿದ್ದ ಅದೇ ರೀತಿಯಾಗಿ ಚೆಕ್ ಮಾಡೋತ್ನೀಗ ಹಿ ಫೌಂಡ್ ಔಟ್ ಎ ನ್ಯೂ ಐಟಮ್ ಆಫ್ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪೆಂಡಿಚರ್. That was for the keeping of the criminal, and this expenditure was for the keeping of the criminal. Nor was it a small item either. It wasn't a small item either. It was too much expensive only. There was a special guard, and there was also the man's food. So ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಒಬ್ಬ ಗಾರ್ಡನ್ನು ಇಟ್ಕೋಬೇಕಿತ್ತು, ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಅವನು ಊಟದ ಖರ್ಚು ಎಷ್ಟಾಗ್ತಿತ್ತು ಇದನ್ನು ನೋಡಬೇಕಿತ್ತು. It came to more than 600 francs a year. So the amount of maintenance or keeping the criminal was 600 francs per year. ಒಂದು ವರ್ಷಕ್ಕೆ ದಿ ಮೇಂಟೆನೆನ್ಸ್ ಆಫ್ ದಿ ಕ್ರಿಮಿನಲ್ ವಾಸ್ 600 francs. 600 francs was too much. It came to more than 600 francs a year, and the worst of it was that the fellow was still young and healthy. And the worst ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಏನಪ್ಪ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಕೆಟ್ಟ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ that the criminal was still young. He was still young and healthy. ಆರೋಗ್ಯವಂತ ಇದ್ದ, ಯುವಕನೇ ಇದ್ದ. And might live for 50 years. ಇನ್ನೂ ಒಂದು 50 ವರ್ಷ ಮಠ ಅವನು ಬಾಳೆ ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದು. ಸೊ ಯು ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಎಸ್ಟಿಮೇಟ್ ವಾಟ್ ಕುಡ್ ಬಿ ದಿ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪೆನ್ಸ್ ಆನ್ ದಟ್ ಕ್ರಿಮಿನಲ್. ಅವನ ಮ್ಯಾಗ ಖರ್ಚು ಎಷ್ಟು ಆಗ್ಬೋದಪ್ಪ ಅಂತ ನೋಡ್ಬೋದು. 600 francs a year ಇಂಟು 50 years ಎಷ್ಟಾಗುತ್ತೆ ನೋಡಿದ್ರೆ ಇಟ್ ವಾಸ್ ಟೂ ಮಚ್ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪೆನ್ಸಿವ್ ಅಗೇನ್. ಸೊ ವೆನ್ ಒನ್ ಕಮ್ ಟು ರೆಕನ್ ಇಟ್ ಅಪ್ ಮೀನ್ಸ್ ಟು ಥಿಂಕ್ ಓವರ್ ಇಟ್. ಅದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಒಂದು ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಯೋಚನೆ ಮಾಡಕತ್ತಾರೆ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಇಟ್ ವಾಸ್ ವೆರಿ ಮಚ್ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪೆನ್ಸಿವ್. ಅದು ಇದಕ್ಕಿಂತ ಖರ್ಚು ಇದು ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಆಗತ್ತು. The matter was serious. It was serious and to be thought over of it. It would never do. So this wasn't accepted. ಅಥವಾ ಈ ರೀತಿದಾಗ ನಡೆಯಂಗಿಲ್ಲ. So the prince summoned his ministers and said to them. ಅವನಿಗೆ ಏನು ಮಾಡ್ದ ರಾಜ ಇದ್ದವನು he summoned his ministers again. ಅವನಿಗೆ ಕರೆದು ವಾಟ್ ಕುಡ್ ಬಿ ಡನ್ ಅಗೇನ್, ಇನ್ನು ಏನು ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅವನ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಅಂತಂದು ಥಾಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಇಟ್ ಅಗೇನ್. Again a commission was assembled, committee was appointed to think over the matter. So in today's class we have come to know that there was a small problem in executing the criminal. ಒಂದು ಸಣ್ಣ ಸಮಸ್ಯೆ ಇತ್ತಪ್ಪ. ಏನಪ್ಪ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ they didn't have the guillotine machine as well as the executioner. So what did they do? They inquired it to the neighboring country from the French government. The French government quoted about 16,000 francs, 16,000 francs our quotation ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು. This wasn't acceptable, so they also made a similar inquiry to the Italian government. Italian government ಕೇಳಿದ್ರು. It was also about 12,000 francs. So even it wasn't acceptable. ಇಷ್ಟು ಹಣ ಭಾಳ ಆಗ್ತಿತ್ತು and they couldn't afford it. So they thought of punishing him in the local way, local fashion. ಅಲ್ಲೇ ಮನೆ ಒಳಗನ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ any of the soldiers could punish the criminal ಅಂತಂತಂದು. They made the inquiry to the general, and general went and asked his soldiers. The soldiers didn't agree because they weren't trained to do such things. ಇಂಥದ್ದು ವಸ್ತು ಕಲ್ಚರ್ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತಂತಂದು they rejected the offer and none of them could punish the criminal. So finally what did they do? They appointed a commission, they thought about it and finally came with a new plan that instead of death sentence he should be given life imprisonment. ಅವನಿಗೆ ಏನು ಕೊಡಬೇಕಪ್ಪ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಲೈಫ್ ಇಂಪ್ರಿಸನ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಕೊಟ್ಟರೆ ಸಾಕು ಅಂತಂದು they thought. And obviously the king also could show the mercy also. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಕ್ಷಮಾನು ಮಾಡ್ದಂಗೆ ಆಗ್ತೈತಿ, ಆಮೇಲೆ ಅವನಿಗೆ ಶಿಕ್ಷಣ ಕೊಟ್ಟಂಗೆ ಆಗ್ತೈತಿ. and they thought of giving him life imprisonment. Here there was again another small problem that there wasn't any prison. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾವುದೋ ಒಂದು ಕೈದಿ ಖಾನೆ ಇರಲೇ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಒಂದು ಸಣ್ಣದಿತ್ತು, there was a small lockup where people were kept for 2 or 3 days. ಅಷ್ಟೇ ಒಂದು 2-3 ದಿವಸ ಸಂಬಂಧ ಇಡೋಂಗೆ ಇತ್ತು. ಬಟ್ there wasn't any prison to keep him for the months and years. ವರ್ಷಗಟ್ಟಲೆ ಆಗೋಂಗೆ ಫಾರ್ ದಿ ಲೈಫ್ ಇಂಪ್ರಿಸನ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಕೊನೆಯ ಮಠ ಮುಗಿಯೋಂಗೆ ಅವನಿಗೆ ಯಾವುದೂ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಕೈದಿ ಖಾನೆ ಇರಲಿಲ್ಲ. ದಿಸ್ ವಾಸ್ ಎ ಸ್ಮಾಲ್ ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮ್. ಯಟ್ ಫೈನಲಿ ದೇ ಫೌಂಡ್ ಔಟ್ ಎ ಪ್ರಿಸನ್. ಅಲ್ಲೇ ಒಂದು ಕೈದಿ ಕಂಡದಾದ ಕೂಡಲೇ ದೇ ಪ್ಲೇಸ್ಡ್ ಹಿಮ್ ಇಂಟು ದಟ್ ಸೆಲ್, ಇಂಟು ದಿ ಪ್ರಿಸನ್. ದೇ ಪ್ಲೇಸ್ಡ್ ಎ ಗಾರ್ಡ್ ಆಲ್ಸೋ ಟು ಲುಕ್ ಆಫ್ಟರ್ ಹಿಮ್. ಅವನಿಗೆ ನೋಡೋ ಸಂಬಂಧ ಒಬ್ಬ ಗಾರ್ಡ್ನ ಇಟ್ಟರು. ಹಿಸ್ ಡ್ಯೂಟಿ ವಾಸ್ ಟು ವಾಚ್ ಹಿಮ್ and also fetch food from the kitchen palace. But finally after a year passed, ಒಂದು ವರ್ಷ ಆದ ತಕ್ಷಣ the king, while looking into the account of expenditure and income, he found out a new item of expenditure and that was regarding the maintenance of the criminal maintenance ಮ್ಯಾಗೆ ಎಷ್ಟು ಖರ್ಚು ಬರ್ತಾ ಇತ್ತಪ್ಪ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ it was 600 francs. It was 600 francs. And this was too much again if you thought over it. 600 francs was too much. How come? Because the criminal was still young and healthy and probably he might live for another 50 years. ಮತ್ತು ಒಂದು 50 ವರ್ಷ ಮಟ್ಟ ಅವನು ಜೀವಂತ ಉಳಿದಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಅದು ಖರ್ಚು ಭಾಳ ಆಗ್ತಿತ್ತು. ಸೊ somehow this punishment was also not feasible or not acceptable. ಇದನ್ನು ಖರ್ಚು ದುಬಾರಿ ಅನ್ಸಾಕತ್ತಿತ್ತು. In the next class we'll continue with this lesson, hardly 2 more pages. So go through this lesson. If you find any difficulties, you can ask me.